He bought a ruined lighthouse for pennies. Then his dog found a secret. Buried for a century, rain fell over Seattle like a slow confession, washing the lights into rivers of color. The streets pulsed with motion, people hurrying beneath umbrellas, eyes lowered, each lost in their private storm. Noah Reeves moved among them, unseen. He walked with the stillness of a man trained to vanish. His shoulders were straight, his expression unreadable, but something in his eyes, pale gray, sharp as broken glass, gave him away. They were the eyes of someone who'd seen too much, who had carried the sound of gunfire into a world that pretended peace. Beside him, a German shepherd named Argos matched his pace. The dog's coat shimmered wet in the streetlight, black and gold like smoke over brass. His gait was measured, disciplined, the ghost of a soldier's rhythm. A faint scar crossed his muzzle, a reminder that he too had once fought a war that didn't end when the orders stopped. They crossed under a flickering sign that buzzed in the rain. 24-hour diner. Noah paused. The window was fogged, glowing soft yellow from within. He didn't go inside. He hadn't eaten a full meal with another human being in months. Instead, he leaned against the glass awning, watching his reflection in the puddle at his feet, a man and his dog, both carrying the same kind of silence. Argos shifted, his ears flicking back toward the alley. A sharp sound. Metal striking metal. Noah's hand twitched, instinct taking over. For a split second he was back in the desert, dust in his throat, the air shaking with danger. He caught himself, exhaled slowly, forcing the ghost of combat back into its cage. "Easy, buddy," he murmured. Argos tilted his head, eyes steady, waiting for a signal that the world was safe again. They walked on. By midnight, the rain had deepened into a cold mist. Noah returned to his apartment, a small box on the 17th floor overlooking the grey sprawl of the city. The space was clean, empty, and silent. No pictures, no memories. Just 2 mugs, a mattress, and a stack of unopened mail. He dropped his wet jacket, sat at the table, and stared at the wall. The hum of traffic below was distant, like a lullaby played through static. Argos curled near the door, his breathing slow and steady, the only rhythm Noah trusted anymore. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was jagged and loud, flashes of sand, gunfire, the voice of a man yelling, "Move!" and then nothing but silence. He woke gasping, his heart hammering. Argos was already beside him, pressing his head against Noah's hand. A wordless grounding. "I'm here," Noah whispered, unsure if he meant it for the dog or for himself. He stood, restless. His mind searched for noise, anything to drown the past. He opened his laptop and scrolled, headlines, news, auctions, property listings, empty distractions. Then a small photograph stopped him. Lighthouse. The listing was old, half buried among foreclosure notices. Harbor Point Lighthouse, abandoned property, needs full restoration, $5 as is. The image was grainy but alive. A tall white tower rose against a dark horizon. The keeper's cottage crouched beside it like a wounded sentinel. The description said it stood on the Oregon coast, 2 miles from the nearest town. $5, less than a cup of coffee. Argos lifted his head, eyes on Noah, as if reading the shift in the air. The dog gave a low, questioning sound, not a bark, not quite a growl. "You think I'm crazy?" Noah said, "Maybe I am." He clicked the listing open. The seller was a State Department clearing out properties declared beyond repair. But in that ruin, Noah saw something else. Structure, purpose, command. A place that wouldn't pity him. He leaned back, staring at the photo. The tower's light was long dead, but the sea behind it seemed alive, restless. Something about the image called to him. the way a voice calls a man back to the fight he swore to leave behind. Argos shifted again, letting out a short bark, sharp, decisive. It startled Noah into a laugh. "Yeah," he said softly. "You're right. We've had enough of this city." He opened another window, searching for directions. The road curved along the coast, through forests and rain. At the bottom of the page, in small italic text, was a note that hadn't appeared in the summary. "Structure decommissioned 1921. Ownership records incomplete." He frowned. Incomplete records usually meant government work, military or otherwise, 100 years old, forgotten. He felt something he hadn't felt in years: curiosity. For a long moment, Noah sat in the blue light of the screen, listening to the hum of the rain outside. Then he looked down at Argos, whose gaze was steady and patient, the way it had been during firefights when everything else fell apart. "This time," Noah said quietly, "we're going somewhere no one can find us." The dog tilted his head again, eyes shining. Noah closed the laptop, grabbed the half-empty duffel from the corner, and began to pack. Flashlight, rations, his grandfather's compass, and a small metal tag with Argos's name. The city could keep its noise. He needed the sound of the ocean, the silence that might finally mean peace. Outside, thunder rolled over the skyline. Somewhere deep within the clouds, lightning illuminated the reflection of a single man loading his truck in the dark. As the wipers scraped across the windshield, Noah turned to his partner. "Harbor Point," he said. "Let's go see what's left of the light." Argos barked once, low and clear, a soldier's acknowledgement. They drove through the sleeping city, the rain swallowing their tail lights. Behind them, the storm thickened. Ahead, the road disappeared into the dark, toward the coast, toward something waiting beneath a century of silence. The road to Harbor Point wound through forests of pine and fog, the asphalt cracked and glistening under a steady Oregon rain. Noah's old pickup groaned as it climbed the last hill, the engine echoing in the mist. Beside him, Argos sat upright in the passenger seat, his head tilted towards the window, nose twitching at the salt-heavy air. The ocean appeared all at once, a grey sheet stretching to the edge of the world. The cliffs dropped sharply into the surf, where waves slammed against black rock like fists. Somewhere out there, the lighthouse waited. Stormvale appeared next, a forgotten fishing town clinging to the coast. Most of its buildings were boarded up or half sunk into disrepair. Paint peeled from the church steeple. The main street smelled of rust and fish guts. A few locals lingered under an awning, staring as the truck rolled by, a stranger, a dog, and an out-of-state plate. Noah parked outside a small general store that still had a flickering "open" sign. Inside, the smell of coffee and motor oil mixed with the sea air. Behind the counter stood a boy no older than 20, with sandy hair and a face that hadn't yet learned how to hide its honesty. "Morning," Noah said. The boy nodded slowly, studying the man's weathered jacket and the K9 patch stitched on one sleeve. "You're not from around here?" "No, just passing through," Noah replied, "looking for Harbor Point Lighthouse." The boy froze. "You mean Beacon Cliff?" "That's what the deed says." He whistled low, shaking his head. "You bought that place?" "Sir, no one's lived there since before my granddad was born." "Guess it's time someone did," Noah said. The boy's smile faltered. "You don't want to do that. The fog there doesn't leave. People say it hums at night. No one who tried to fix it ever stayed long. Some didn't leave at all." Noah rested his hand on the counter. "Ghost stories don't bother me." "They should." The boy murmured. "That cliff doesn't like uniforms." From outside, Argos gave a single bark, short and sharp, like punctuation. The boy flinched. "He's just saying hi," Noah said quietly. The boy hesitated, then extended his hand. "Name's Eli Moran. My dad used to fish near there. If you're really going, take the south trail. The main road's washed out from the storm." Noah nodded his thanks, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and headed out. The rain had eased into a mist that clung to everything it touched. He started the truck, but before he could shift into gear, a voice called out. "You'll want to talk to Captain Briggs first," Eli said, stepping off the porch. "He knows the cliffs better than anyone, lives down by the harbor. He'll tell you where not to fall." Noah followed the directions to a dockside shack that looked held together by nothing but stubbornness and rope. Inside, an old man sat cleaning a fishing knife. His skin was tanned like leather, eyes blue and distant, as if still watching the horizon even when he faced the wall. "You the new keeper?" Briggs asked without looking up. "Not yet. Just the owner for now." The captain chuckled dryly. "There's no such thing as owning a light. You either keep it or it keeps you." Noah smiled faintly. "Then I'll try keeping it." Briggs finally met his eyes. "That place used to belong to the Navy, back before the war that ended all wars. They shut it down after something went wrong. Never said what." "I served," Noah said. "I've seen plenty go wrong." Briggs leaned forward, his voice a rasp. "This is different. They say men went missing up there. Others went mad. When the light stopped shining, the sea swallowed a dozen ships. No bodies, no wreckage. Just gone." Noah glanced toward the water. "Superstition travels faster than truth." Briggs shrugged. "Believe what you want. But if you hear the horn blow after midnight, don't answer it." Noah took a slow breath. "I'm not here to fight old ghosts, Captain. I'm here to rest." The old man's eyes softened. "Then I hope you find peace. But peace is a strange thing on that cliff. It doesn't like to stay." Back in the truck, Noah sat for a long while, staring through the windshield. The lighthouse stood in the distance now, a pale shape through the fog, tall and defiant, the remains of its lantern glinting like a blind eye. Argos pressed his nose to the glass, ears pricked forward. "You see it too, huh?" Noah said. Argos let out a low rumble, not fear, but recognition, the way he used to react to an unseen threat on patrol. "Easy, boy." Noah reached out and scratched behind his ear. "It's just a building." But as they drew closer, the air grew colder. The wind picked up, carrying the faintest metallic hum, a sound too rhythmic to be random, like machinery buried deep underground, still turning after a century. They reached the gates at dusk. The path up the hill was overgrown, flanked by stone posts etched with the words, "Harbor Point Light, 1849. One post was split clean through, as if struck by lightning. The iron gate screeched open. Argos jumped down first, sniffing the ground, tail low, body tense. He circled twice, then barked toward the tower, sharp and insistent. Noah followed his gaze. The tower loomed high above them, its bricks cracked, windows shattered, vines crawling up its spine. The keeper's cottage beside it sagged under the weight of time. Yet the structure held an odd dignity, like a soldier refusing to fall even when the war was long lost. He ran a hand over the rusted doorframe. The metal was cold, almost wet to the touch. Inside, dust hung thick as smoke. The floorboards creaked under his boots. Argos trotted ahead, nose sweeping the ground, tail cutting through the dark. Suddenly he froze. A low growl vibrated in his throat. "What is it?" Noah whispered. Argos moved toward the far wall, pawing at a pile of old rope. Beneath it lay a brass plaque, corroded but still legible. Noah wiped away the grime. The letters were faint, but clear enough to read, "Property of the United States Navy, Calypso Division." Noah's breath caught. He'd seen that name once before, in a report sealed for over a century. Argos let out another bark, louder this time, echoing up the spiral of the tower. The wind answered, a low moan that rolled through the stone like a heartbeat. The old bell at the top of the lighthouse gave a single, hollow ring, though no one had touched it. Noah looked up through the shattered stairs, every muscle taut. Argos stood beside him, teeth bared, eyes locked on the darkness above. The storm outside began to rise again. Noah exhaled slowly. Guess rest will have to wait. And as lightning split the sky beyond the windows, the first beam of light flickered once, weak but alive, from a tower that hadn't shone in 80 years. By nightfall, the fog had thickened into a living thing. It crept through the cracks in the window frames, coiled around the walls, and whispered against the glass. The sea beyond the cliffs roared, its waves pounding the rocks with the fury of something ancient. Noah stood by the lantern window, watching lightning fracture the horizon. The wind screamed across the bluff, rattling every loose nail in the lighthouse. Argos paced near the door, uneasy, his instincts sharp. "You feel it too, huh?" Noah said softly. The dog gave a low whine. His ears flicked toward the tower, eyes glinting in the dim light. Another gust slammed the door, and the old hinges groaned like something alive. Outside, the storm hit full force. Rain lashed sideways, turning the world to static. The ocean's surface blurred into chaos, and through that chaos came a sound. Faint at first, but distinct. Clink, pause, clink, clink, pause. Noah's brow furrowed. It was too rhythmic to be the wind. Argos's head snapped up. He barked once, sharp and guttural, then bolted for the stairs. Noah grabbed the flashlight and followed, boots pounding the steps that spiraled up into the tower. Each level felt colder than the last, the air heavy with salt and something metallic. Halfway up, the noise stopped. Only the storm remained. Noah reached the landing and swept his light across the machinery room. Rusted gears, broken glass, coils of wire, everything drowned in dust. The great Fresnel lens hung cracked and useless. Then it came again. Clink, clink, pause, clink! This time the sound was coming from below. Argos whirled around, growling low in his chest. Noah froze, listening. The sound wasn't random. It carried rhythm, short, short, long, short. It was Morse code. He hadn't heard that beat in years, but muscle memory recognized it instantly. He set the flashlight on a shelf, pulled out his notebook, and jotted down what he heard. CL. No. Wait. The pattern shifted. Faster now. SOS. The old distress signal. Noah's pulse quickened. He moved down the stairs 2 at a time, Argos racing ahead. When they reached the base of the tower, the sound stopped again. Dead silence. He aimed the light around the room. Shadows stretched across the stone floor. The air smelled of wet rope and metal. A draft slipped through a crack in the wall, carrying a sound almost too faint to notice, like breath. Argos stiffened. The fur along his spine rose. He let out a deep growl, the kind that meant warning, not fear. Noah raised his weapon, more out of instinct than need. "Who's there?" Only the wind answered. He approached the wall where the draft came through. His fingers brushed a loose stone, cold, slick with moisture. He pressed it gently. It shifted. Behind it, the faint clinking returned, faster, urgent. Argos barked, leaping forward, paws scraping the wall. Noah grabbed the crowbar from the tool rack and pried the stone loose. Beneath it, a hollow chamber yawned open, dark and damp. He shone the light inside. A piece of corroded machinery sat wedged between the stones, a brass transmitter the size of a shoebox, connected to a long rusted wire that disappeared into the floor. The power source was ancient, but still faintly alive, humming as if refusing to die. It clicked once more, Short, short, long. Then silence. Noah crouched, examining it. There was no modern wiring, no battery. Yet it had just sent a signal. The label on its side read, Calypso Unit 12, active. The same word he'd seen on the plaque earlier. His throat tightened. He whispered, "How the hell are you still running?" Argos sniffed around the base, pawing at the dirt. His nails scraped something metallic. Noah cleared the soil away until a small metal plate emerged, engraved with a series of numbers and letters. Beneath the corrosion, one word stood out clear. Reeves. Noah froze. His own last name. He stared at it, rain pounding the roof above, the sound like distant gunfire. Argos looked up, eyes steady, as if understanding before Noah did. Lightning flashed through the window, white and sudden, and for an instant Noah saw movement reflected in the lens above them, a figure in the stairwell. He spun around, flashlight raised. Nothing there. Only Argos, still watching the darkness, every muscle tense. Maybe we're not alone, Noah whispered. The generator sputtered somewhere deep below, the old wiring buzzing like a heartbeat. Outside, the storm screamed harder. He switched off his light to listen again, letting his senses take over. In the darkness between thunderclaps, he heard it. One more metallic tap, softer than before. Not from the wall, from above. Argos barked, tail rigid, then bounded toward the stairwell. Noah followed, adrenaline driving him up the slick steps. Halfway up, the light from his flashlight flickered back on. A shadow moved across the top platform, fast and human-sized. "Hey!" Noah shouted, his voice barely audible, over the wind. He reached the final step, but the platform was empty. Only the storm outside, the cracked glass, and the distant cry of gulls. Then he noticed the door to the balcony was ajar. It had been bolted shut when he arrived. He stepped out into the rain. The wind howled around him, tearing at his jacket. Argos pressed close, barking into the gale. Noah swung the light toward the sea. Nothing but waves. But when he turned back towards the tower, he saw it. The beacon lens, dark for nearly a century, flickering faintly from within. A pulse of white, weak but deliberate. Clink, 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 Morse code again, only this time slower. A different pattern. He translated it under his breath. "Still here." Noah stood frozen. The beam vanished. The tower went dark again. Argos let out a low, mournful sound and stepped closer, pressing his head against Noah's hand. The contact grounded him, kept him from sliding fully into disbelief. He looked out at the black sea once more, the words still echoing in his head. Still here. The storm raged on, pounding the cliffs, drowning the world in thunder. Inside the lighthouse, the old transmitter gave one last mechanical gasp before dying completely. But even through the wind, Noah swore he could hear a different rhythm, the slow, steady beat of something alive, watching, waiting. He holstered his weapon and whispered to Argos, "We're not alone in this place, buddy. Not by a long shot." The dog's ears twitched. He stared at the top of the tower again, eyes gleaming in the dark. Outside, the sea swallowed another crash of lightning. Inside, something unseen breathed once, and the sound of metal tapping faded into silence. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world heavy and washed clean. Mist drifted low across the cliffs. The sea below glimmered under a pale sun, calm now, almost pretending innocence. Noah hadn't slept. The memory of the beacon's flicker, that final message, still here, refused to leave him. He replayed the Morse code in his mind, over and over, searching for logic where there might be none. Argos stayed close as Noah stepped outside, shovel in hand, boots sinking into the wet earth around the lighthouse foundation. Water pooled in small craters where the storm had eaten away at the soil, The air smelled of salt and old iron. "Guess we start fixing this place," Noah muttered. Argos trotted ahead, nose to the ground. He was calmer than last night, but alert, the way he used to be during base inspections. His ears pricked every few seconds, listening to things Noah couldn't hear. The two worked in silence for hours. Noah shoveled away layers of moss and debris, clearing the old stone base that held the lighthouse upright. Argos wandered in circles around him, sniffing, pawing at certain spots, sometimes stopping to stare into nothing as if catching a scent that wasn't there anymore. Then the dog froze. His paw hovered mid-air, ears stiff, head tilted toward the north corner of the foundation. "What is it?" Noah asked. Argos scratched at the soil, claws clicking against something solid. Noah crouched beside him and brushed the dirt away. Beneath the layer of mud was a flat stone, smoother than the rest. The moment the light hit it, Noah saw the faintest trace of something carved into the surface. Symbols. He fetched his brush from the toolbox and began clearing the grime. The lines emerged slowly. Crossed anchors, a triangle, a single star above. It wasn't random. It was organized, deliberate. A memory stirred in him, something from years back at the Naval Archives. He'd seen those symbols before, in a classified file. "This isn't just a lighthouse," he whispered. He kept brushing, uncovering more of the markings. They stretched along the base, interconnected like a chain. But each symbol had been deliberately scratched through, one by one, with a deep, vertical line, a strike mark, the kind used in wartime reports to mark a unit as lost or erased. Argos sniffed the carvings, then backed away with a quiet growl. Noah traced one with his finger. The edges were sharp despite the erosion, as if whoever had done this wanted it to last. He whispered, "Coastal Reconnaissance Division." That's what the old report had called them. A small Navy unit from World War I, operating under a project known only as Calypso. They had been assigned to study underwater communication, sonar experiments, and something else, geoacoustic mapping. Every record of them vanished after 1919. Noah stood, looking at the tower above him. The architecture suddenly made sense. The reinforced foundation, the extra wiring, the sealed rooms. This wasn't just built to guide ships. It had been built to listen. He turned to Argos. They used it as a listening post. The dog tilted his head, as if asking, "Then who are they listening to?" Noah stepped back, scanning the ground. More stones lay half-buried under the collapsed fence. He cleared another and found a different symbol, two parallel lines enclosing a circle, followed by the number 12. The same number stamped on the brass transmitter they found last night. His pulse quickened. Calypso Unit 12. He crouched again, examining the vertical strike mark across the circle. The gesture wasn't just a cancellation, it was ritual, final, the kind of mark used when an entire crew was written off the books. Argos barked once, breaking the silence. He was staring at the far end of the wall where the soil had eroded away completely. Noah followed and found another slab, half buried, but this one bore words instead of symbols. The letters were jagged, carved by hand. "The sea remembers." Noah straightened, chilled despite the sunlight. He stepped back to take in the pattern, each stone connected, each mark aligned. Together they formed a path along the foundation's edge, circling the base of the tower. It wasn't random graffiti, it was a message. Argos barked again, louder this time. He was digging near the end of the path. Noah hurried over just as the dog's claws hit metal. They uncovered a small hatch, rusted shut and sealed with a heavy bolt. Noah's breath fogged in the cold air as he leaned close. The hatch was engraved with faint letters. "Authorized personnel only, U.S. Navy." But below that, scratched crudely into the metal, was another word, one that didn't belong. Reversed. Noah frowned. Reversed what? He tried the handle. It didn't budge. Argos growled low again, circling the hatch, ears pinned back. The dog's body language wasn't fear, it was warning. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of distant thunder far out over the water. Noah's heart thudded. He felt like he was standing on the edge of something enormous, something that had waited 100 years for him to uncover it. He sat back on his heels, staring at the carvings, the struck-out military emblems, the erased history, the coded messages, all of it hidden beneath the foundation of a forgotten lighthouse, and all of it somehow carrying his family name. Argos nudged his arm, eyes locked on his. Noah placed a hand on the dog's head, steadying both of them. Whoever buried this, he said quietly, didn't want it found. The clouds thickened again over the horizon. A single gull cried somewhere above the cliffs. Noah looked at the carvings once more and felt a strange certainty. The storm from last night hadn't been random. It had uncovered what was meant to stay buried. He stood, glancing at the tower. We're not leaving, Argos. Not yet. The dog wagged his tail once, slow but resolute, as if he already knew. From deep inside the tower, something clicked, a faint metallic echo, like a machine awakening after long sleep. The sound travelled through the stone under Noah's boots. He turned sharply toward the open door. The old beacon lens caught a fragment of sunlight and flashed once, just once, across his face. And though the air was still, Noah could swear he heard it again, the faint rhythm of Morse code echoing beneath the floor. He knelt, pressing his ear to the cold stone. The message was too faint to read, but one thing was certain. Whatever this place had been, it wasn't finished speaking. Argos leaned beside him, eyes fixed on the ground, listening too. Together they stayed there in silence, man and dog, as the wind from the sea rose again, whispering through the cracks of a century-old secret waiting to surface. The storm came without warning, roaring out of the Pacific like a living thing. By dusk, the sky had turned the color of old steel. Rain hammered the cliffs, and the ocean rose in white walls that crashed against the rocks with the weight of fury. Noah ran to secure the gear outside while Argos barked from the doorway, tail stiff, the hackles on his back standing like a ridge. The wind ripped through his coat, the taste of salt sharp on his tongue. He hadn't seen a storm this bad in years, not since his deployment. The kind of storm that could change the shape of a coastline overnight. By midnight, the waves had grown monstrous. He could barely see the sea wall through the spray, just the violent silhouettes of water breaking over it. He shouted for Argos, but the dog was already ahead, bounding through the mud toward the cliff's edge, barking frantically. Argos! Heel! The dog ignored him. Something had caught his attention. Noah followed, slipping over wet stones until he reached the wall. The stormlight from the lighthouse beam flickered erratically through the fog. Argos was digging, paws flinging sand and rock aside with furious precision. Each bark came sharper than the last. "What the hell did you find?" Noah muttered, kneeling beside him. The ground beneath the dog's paws had caved in slightly, forming a depression where the sea spray and rainwater pooled. Beneath that, something glinted, not rock. Metal. Noah brushed away the muck, his fingers finding the edge of a thick iron plate, buried deep. He scraped at it until a set of corroded hinges came into view. The plate wasn't flat. It curved slightly, like a sealed door. "Good boy," he whispered. Argos barked again, the sound nearly lost in the thunder. They worked together under the storm's assault, Noah with the crowbar, Argos digging and clawing at the loosened earth. Each strike of the tool sent vibrations up Noah's arms. The latch refused to move. Rust held it fast, as if the sea itself wanted it buried forever. Hours passed. The tide crept closer, waves licking the stones at their feet. Finally, with one last heave, the bolt gave way with a sharp metallic crack. A gust of air hissed out, cold and stale, smelling of iron, oil, and something older, time itself. Noah staggered back as the hatch creaked open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Argos sniffed the opening, then looked up at Noah with a low, questioning whine. "You're staying close," Noah said. "No hero stuff." He switched on his flashlight and started down. The ladder moaned with each step, metal trembling under his boots. Argos followed, moving carefully, his nails clicking softly against the rungs. The air grew colder the deeper they went, until it bit through Noah's clothes. The beam of light cut through dust and shadows, revealing a tunnel carved from rock and reinforced with steel ribs. At the bottom, the space opened into a wide chamber. Noah's light swept across rows of old equipment. Tables, filing cabinets, maps yellowed with age. A radio console stood at the center, still connected to cables that vanished into the ceiling. The faint outline of words was stenciled across the far wall in flaking paint. "Project Calypso," Noah whispered. Argos sniffed around the floor, tail low, cautious but determined. He stopped at a desk overturned in the corner and barked softly. Noah turned the light that way. Papers lay scattered, soaked by years of condensation. He picked one up gently, squinting at the faded type. Acoustic Mapping Division, Harbor Point Facility. There were names listed below, each followed by a black line crossing it out, except for one. Edward Reeves. Noah froze. His throat tightened. Reeves. His grandfather's name. The one no one in his family ever spoke about. Argos gave a low growl, not of fear, but alertness. His eyes locked on something behind Noah. The man turned the flashlight toward the sound, a faint tapping echoing through the steel walls, steady and deliberate. Clink. Pause. Clink. Clink. Noah exhaled. "You've got to be kidding me." He crossed the room, following the noise. It came from the radio console. The device was dead. No light, no power. Yet the old microphone trembled slightly, as if something on the other end was trying to speak through static that no longer existed. Argos barked once, sharply, and the tapping stopped. Then, for the first time, another sound answered. Not metal, not storm. A human voice, faint and mechanical, filtering through the radio's hollow shell. It said a single word. Calypso. Then silence. Noah stood frozen, every instinct on fire. Argos pressed close to his leg, watching the machine, ready to defend if needed. He placed a trembling hand on the radio. "If this is a recording," he murmured, "it shouldn't be able to run without power." He reached behind it, tracing the cables until he found where they disappeared into the wall. The insulation had long decayed, but one line led to a sealed panel marked with faded paint. "Emergency relay, do not transmit." He pried the panel open. Inside was a small generator the size of a suitcase, wrapped in cables and copper coils. A single light flickered weakly. Somehow, impossibly, it was still alive. Argos pawed at the ground again, uncovering more debris, small metallic tags stamped with serial numbers. Noah lifted one and wiped away the grime. "Calypso Unit 12, property of U.S. Navy." He stared at it, the weight of realization settling in his chest. This wasn't a simple communication post. It was a command bunker, a covert testing site buried beneath the cliffs. He aimed the light back at the wall. Beneath the painted warning, another phrase had been carved directly into the steel by hand, deep and angry. "Do not transmit." As if someone had written it in desperation, not policy. The floor creaked suddenly behind him. Noah turned fast, flashlight raised. Argos stiffened, ears up, teeth bared. For a split second he thought he saw movement at the far end of the tunnel, a figure ducking behind a support beam. He froze, listening. Nothing but the hum of the dying generator and the distant thunder above. "Easy," he whispered. Argos didn't relax. His eyes stayed, locked on that corner. Noah stepped closer, his light cutting through the dark. The beam hit something. Not a person, but a shape wrapped in canvas. He crouched and pulled it open. Inside lay an old naval uniform, still intact, insignia worn but legible. The patch read, Reeves, E. His blood ran cold. Argos let out a short, trembling whine. Noah stared at the uniform for a long moment, then reached for the dog's collar, gripping it tightly. The radio crackled again, a burst of static breaking the silence. Then the same word, clearer this time, as if whispered directly into the room. Calypso. The generator light went out. The chamber plunged into darkness. Noah raised his flashlight, but before he could turn it back on, he felt Argos's body press against his leg. Solid, steady, a living anchor in the dark. He knelt beside him, heart pounding, listening to the sound of the storm above, the sea below, and the faint echo of a century-old secret breathing once more beneath the cliffs of Harbour Point. When Noah finally opened his eyes, the storm had passed. The air inside the bunker was damp and cold, the kind of cold that seeped into bone. His flashlight flickered weakly in his hand. Argos lay beside him, head resting on his paws, watching his every move. The generator was dead. Only the sound of the ocean filtered faintly through the hatch above. Noah took a deep breath, forcing the tightness in his chest to ease. The uniform, the radio, the word Calypso. It all churned in his mind like static. He turned the flashlight toward the desk where the papers were scattered. The top drawer of the old metal cabinet had warped shut, but after a few hard pulls it gave way. Inside were several notebooks sealed in wax paper. Most were unreadable, the ink dissolved into stains. But one, wrapped tightly and marked with a red cross, had survived. He peeled the paper back. The cover was cracked leather, the edges burned, but the name on it stopped him cold. Edward Reeves. Noah sat down hard on the nearest chair. His pulse thundered in his ears. He'd heard the name as a boy, whispered once by his grandmother when she'd said, "We don't speak about him." Argos lifted his head and watched, quiet and still. Noah opened the first page. The handwriting was neat, measured, written in fountain pen. He read aloud softly, the words trembling in his voice. November 2, 1918. Our orders arrived tonight. We are to transmit false coordinates to divert enemy submarines away from the coast. Strange request. Our signal will be indistinguishable from Fleet Command. Captain says we are saving lives. I'm not sure whose. He turned the page. The next entries grew darker, the ink more hurried. November 4th. Transmission successful, or so they say. We intercepted our own fleet's response. They think we're the enemy. We tried to correct it, but command has gone silent. Briggs believes we've been cut off intentionally. Briggs, the name, jolted Noah. The old fisherman in town, Captain Briggs, had the same last name. Coincidence or something deeper? He read on. November 6th. Orders came through from an unknown channel. Hold position. Do not reveal your status. The light must remain dark. We obeyed. The men are restless. They can hear ships out there in the fog. I fear one is ours. Noah stopped reading. The room seemed to grow smaller around him. He felt Argos press closer, his breath warm against Noah's hand. The next page was smeared, but one line stood clear. November 7th, 0300 hours. Friendly fire. He swallowed hard. The ink beneath had bled, but the words still screamed. They thought we were the enemy. They shelled the coast. Calypso Base took 3 direct hits. Radio destroyed. Only Briggs and I left alive. I can't reach command. I can't stop the bleeding." Noah turned to the final entry, dated 2 days later. "November 9th. Briggs gone. I buried him under the sea wall. No orders now. The ocean has gone silent. They told us the light must never shine again. But I kept it burning. Someone has to remember." Noah sat frozen, staring at the words until his vision blurred. His great-grandfather, Edward Reeves, had survived what history erased. The Navy hadn't just lost contact with Calypso Base. They'd destroyed it. Argos pawed gently at his knee. Noah blinked, coming back to the present. He looked around the bunker again, suddenly seeing it through Edward's eyes. The same walls, the same radio, the same cold. "They killed their own," he whispered, "and buried the truth right here." He looked at the wall where "Do Not Transmit" was painted, the same warning his ancestor had ignored. And maybe, Noah thought, that was why the signal still lived in the wires. Edward hadn't followed orders. He'd sent something before he died. Argos barked once, startling him. The dog was standing near the far end of the room, nose pressed against a filing cabinet that had toppled over during the night. His tail was low, wagging slightly. "What did you find, buddy?" Noah knelt beside him and shone the flashlight inside. Behind the cabinet was a hidden compartment, small and rectangular, sealed with a corroded padlock. It took a few minutes of prying before it snapped open. Inside lay a single tin box. He opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a second item. Another notebook, smaller than the first, and next to it a brass key. The notebook had only a few pages, but each was numbered and stamped, "Classified Calypso." The first line read, "Sub-Level 2, Containment Room. Experimental Chamber 4. Noah frowned. He hadn't seen any other doors. This bunker was supposed to be a single room, but if there was a sub-level... Argos barked again, pacing near the back wall where the generator had been. The flashlight beam caught something faint, a groove along the floor. Noah brushed away the dust and saw it. The outline of a hatch hidden under, layers of grime. He pressed against it. It didn't move. Rust sealed it shut. The key might fit, but the mechanism was jammed. He would need tools, leverage, time. He stood up, gripping the diary tightly. The last words of Edward Reeves pulsed in his head like a drumbeat. They told us the light must never shine again. But I kept it burning. Noah turned toward the ladder leading up to the hatch. "Come on, Argos," he said quietly. "We're not done yet." The dog stayed close, climbing behind him as thunder rolled again somewhere far off the coast. When they reached the surface, daylight hit Noah's face like a slap. The sea was calm now, but the cliffs bore fresh scars, rock torn loose by the storm, earth shifted. He looked back toward the lighthouse. Its cracked glass caught a flash of sun, almost like an eye opening. Argos sat beside him, tail brushing the ground. His ears twitched as if he too could sense the change in the air. Noah held the diary to his chest. The words, the names, the truth buried beneath. It all pointed to one thing. Project Calypso wasn't about protecting the coast. It was about covering something up. And now, 100 years later, that secret had chosen him to uncover it. Argos gave a single bark, sharp and certain, breaking the silence. "Yeah," Noah murmured, looking at the tower. "We'll keep the light burning too." The wind rose, carrying the faint scent of salt and rust. From deep within the lighthouse, something answered, a soft metallic hum like a heartbeat that had never truly stopped. The morning fog rolled through Stormvale like a living tide, swallowing the rooftops and muffling the world to a hush. The lighthouse loomed in the distance, a ghost in the mist, while Noah and Argos walked down the empty main street toward the old brick library. Noah hadn't slept. Edward Reeves's diary still echoed in his mind. The false orders, the friendly fire, the desperate vow to keep the light burning. The revelation had shaken him, but also anchored him. He finally had a name, a purpose, and a trail to follow. The library was a relic of another age, its salt-stained windows clouded and warped. When Noah pushed open the door, the small brass bell above it chimed weakly. The smell of dust and old wood greeted him, thick with time. Behind the front desk sat an elderly woman with silver hair tied neatly in a bun. Her glasses hung from a thin chain, and her expression was as sharp as the winter wind outside. "Can I help you?" she asked without looking up. "I hope so," Noah said, removing his cap. "I'm looking for any records on Harbour Point, especially around 1918 or 1919, the old lighthouse." At the mention of the lighthouse, her hand stopped mid-motion. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his. "Why would you want those?" Noah hesitated. "Because my family might be connected to what happened there." The woman studied him for a long moment. "Your name? Reeves, Noah Reeves." Her lips tightened, and she leaned back in her chair. "You shouldn't be digging into that, Mr. Reeves. Some stories were buried for good reason." Argos, sitting quietly beside him, tilted his head and gave a low, soft whine. The woman's gaze dropped to the dog. Her expression softened instantly. "And who's this gentleman?" she asked. "Argos," Noah said, his tone unconsciously gentler. "He's my partner." Argos approached the desk, tail low, and rested his chin carefully on the woman's frail hand. She blinked, as if the simple touch reached deeper than any argument could. After a long pause, she exhaled. "My name is Marion Hale. I was born here, and I've worked in this library for 50 years. My grandfather was the church clerk during the quarantine." "Quarantine?" Noah asked. She nodded slowly. "That's what they called it. Said there'd been a gas leak at the beacon. The military came in, sealed the cliff, and told everyone to forget what they saw. We were never to speak of it again." Noah felt a chill creep down his spine. "Did your grandfather believe that story?" Marion smiled sadly. "He believed in God, not in men." She stood, motioning for him to follow. "Come with me." She led them through a narrow hallway to a locked iron door at the back of the library. She took a ring of keys from around her neck and opened it with a metallic scrape. The air beyond was colder, heavier, filled with the scent of stone and history. They descended a short flight of stairs into a basement lined with filing cabinets, wooden crates, and brittle newspapers stacked in bundles. A single light bulb hung overhead, swaying slightly. Marion moved with practiced care, pulling open drawers until she found what she was looking for. A leather-bound journal wrapped in cloth. She placed it on a table between them. "This belonged to Reverend Samuel Gray," she said softly. "He was the town's pastor during the events of 1919. Noah hesitated before opening it. The handwriting was neat, but trembled toward the end, as if written by a man haunted. March 1st, 1919. They came again tonight, men in uniform, strangers. They spoke of poison in the air, of gas from the sea. But no one smelled gas, only the smoke from the fires on the cliffs. The sound of gunfire carried across the water. They said it was an accident. I fear it was not." Noah's throat tightened as he turned another page. March 5th. The families of the men at the beacon have been told their sons died heroes, yet no bodies returned. Officials sealed the path to the cliffs. They call it mercy. I call it deceit. The next entry was written in a rush, ink smeared by tears or rain. March 8th. They brought us crates, told us to bury them in the churchyard and never open them, said it was contaminated. But when one broke open, it was not gas, it was uniforms, burned, marked with our flag. Noah closed the journal, pulse hammering in his temples. So the gas leak, it was a cover-up. Marion nodded slowly. For something far worse. Argos paced the room, sniffing along the shelves, tail twitching. Then he stopped in front of a locked cabinet, whining low. Marion glanced at him. "He's got a good nose," she murmured, and reached for another key. Inside were old photographs, blurred faces of soldiers in heavy coats, standing before a lighthouse that looked exactly like Harbour Point. Marion pulled one free and handed it to Noah. "There," she said, pointing to the man in the center. "That was your great-grandfather." Noah's breath caught. The man in the picture looked just like him. Same jaw, same eyes, same haunted calm. "He wasn't supposed to survive," Marion whispered. "But he did. He came back once, months after the fire. My grandfather said he looked wrong. Pale, like someone who'd walked out of the grave. He said only one thing before leaving." Noah looked up. "What did he say?" She met his eyes, and her voice dropped to a tremor. He said, "The light must never die. It remembers what they did." For a long moment, no one spoke. The faint hum of the old building filled the silence. Finally, Marion stepped back, her hands trembling slightly. "I kept that journal hidden all my life, waiting for someone with his name to come for it. Maybe it's foolish, but I believe places remember. And that light—" She glanced towards the fog-shrouded cliffs visible through the small basement window. "It's waiting for you to finish what he started." Argos let out a single, low bark, almost like agreement. Marion smiled faintly, reaching down to pat the dog's head. "He's right, you know. Some secrets weigh too heavy to stay buried forever." Noah looked at her, the photograph trembling in his hand. "If what you're saying is true, then the people who covered this up were part of my own government. They were part of everyone's," Marion said quietly. "War makes men do things that peace cannot forgive." Outside, a horn sounded faintly through the mist, the long, mournful call of a ship. The sound rippled through the walls like memory. Marion walked him back up the stairs. At the doorway, she turned and placed a hand on his arm. "Be careful, Mr. Reeves. The last man who tried to uncover the truth about that lighthouse never came back." Noah hesitated. "Who was that?" Her eyes softened, full of unspoken sorrow. "My brother." Noah stood silent. The weight of her words sank into him like stone. Marion's expression steadied. "Go, before the fog thickens. But remember what your great-grandfather wrote. Keep the light burning." Noah nodded. Argos pressed against his leg, ready to move. As they stepped back into the cold air of Stormvale, the mist swallowed them whole. From somewhere far out near the cliffs, the faint hum of the lighthouse echoed again, soft, steady, like a heartbeat, and in that rhythm, Noah could almost hear a message calling through the years. It's time to wake the light. The wind was sharp that morning, slicing through the mist like a blade. The storm clouds had cleared, but the sea was restless, waves breaking hard against the rocks below Beacon Cliff. Noah stood at the base of the old lighthouse, staring up at its blackened shell. The door, welded shut decades ago, bore the marks of rust, salt, and time, as if it had been sealed not just to keep people out, but to trap something in. Argos sat beside him, ears tilted back, his eyes locked on the tower. He hadn't barked since they left the library, but now his low growl vibrated through the air like a warning. "I know, boy," Noah murmured. "Feels wrong, but we have to open it." He set down his pack and pulled out a crowbar and a small acetylene torch. It took nearly an hour to burn through the thick layer of steel that braced the old door. The scent of heated metal filled the air, sharp and acrid. Finally, with one last strike, the lock gave way. The door creaked open, releasing a gust of air that smelled of rust and ash. Noah stepped inside. Dust hung like fog in the beam of his flashlight. The interior was a tomb of silence. The spiral staircase wound upward, iron steps coated in years of grime. The walls were scarred with soot, black lines trailing upward like veins of fire frozen in time. Argos entered cautiously, paws silent on the cold floor. He sniffed the air, then glanced up toward the stairs. Noah followed his gaze. "Let's go see what's waiting," he said quietly. Halfway up, Argos stopped abruptly and barked once, short and sharp. Noah froze. The sound echoed strangely, bouncing off the stone walls with a hollow resonance. He frowned, pressed his palm against the section of wall Argos was facing, and tapped it lightly. It sounded wrong. Hollow. "Good boy," Noah whispered. He crouched, feeling along the seams of the bricks. The mortar was uneven, newer than the rest of the tower. Someone had sealed something here, deliberately. He swung the crowbar, wedging it into the crack. The first strike sent dust raining down. The second tore loose a fragment of brick. The third opened a narrow hole, and a faint, metallic smell seeped out. Not rot, but cold iron and oil. He worked faster, the adrenaline cutting through fatigue. Argos backed away slightly, barking in rhythm with each strike. Finally, with a deep groan, the wall gave way, revealing a small square chamber behind it. Noah aimed his flashlight inside. The beam fell on a space no larger than a storage room, yet every inch of it carried the weight of history. Dust lay thick as snow. A long table sat at the center, covered by a silver-gray tarp. On the far wall hung something large, a faded sheet of fabric, its corners nailed to the stone. Noah stepped closer. The air was colder here, almost unnaturally so. He brushed the dust off the tarp and saw the words written in thick black paint, the unremembered below it. 14 names, each followed by a rank and date. Noah's throat tightened. These were the men from the diary, the ones who never came home, the ones the world had been told never existed. Argos moved to the table, sniffing at the edges of the tarp. Noah lifted it gently. Beneath lay a rusted steel tube, its cap sealed in wax, and beside it a photograph, black and white, edges curling with age. He picked up the photo. 14 men stood in front of the lighthouse, their faces proud but weary. The ocean stretched behind them like a curtain of light. And there, at the center, stood Edward Reeves. Noah's heart pounded. His great-grandfather. Younger than Noah was now, wearing the same determined expression. He turned the steel tube in his hands. The seal was brittle. He cracked it open, and inside, rolled tight, was a sheaf of yellowed papers stamped Top Secret, Naval Research Division. He unrolled the first page. The header read, Project Calypso, Sonar Test Field Report, January 1918. The words blurred for a moment as his mind caught up. He read slowly, each line tightening the knot in his chest. Primary objective, test of long-range subsurface resonance system, Calypso array, designed to detect enemy submarines via sound reflection. Incident, malfunction in frequency calibration. System generated sustained 300 Hz pulse at 1200 decibels, resulting in catastrophic resonance failure. Subsurface structures compromised. Personnel exposure exceeded safety parameters. Casualties, 14 confirmed dead, 3 missing. Directive, event classified under harbor contamination cover protocol. All physical evidence to be sealed. Personnel list expunged from record. Noah's vision swam. He felt the weight of the report in his hands. Heavy. Final. They hadn't died in a gas leak. They'd been erased. Their lives traded for silence. Argos whined softly, his nose pressing against Noah's leg. The sound grounded him. They killed them, Noah whispered, and blamed the sea. He flipped to the final page. It bore a handwritten note, different from the rest, not typed, but scrawled in black ink. I warned them. The signal wasn't ready. When the pulse began, the cliffs shook like thunder. We tried to shut it down, but command locked the channel. The ocean screamed back. I told them to stop. They didn't. I can still hear it, even now, under the waves. E.R. Edward Reeves's initials. Noah leaned against the wall, the realization sinking deep. The entire town had been silenced to hide a military mistake, one that had cost his own blood. He looked back at the wall of names, the faded words above them. The unremembered. Argos moved to the far corner of the room, sniffing near a pile of old tools. His paw scraped something metallic. Noah knelt and found a brass box, small and sealed with a rusted latch. Inside was a medallion, engraved with a symbol, a triangle intersected by waves, the Calypso insignia. He turned it over and found an inscription carved into the back. To keep the light is to remember. Noah closed his fist around it. His great-grandfather had tried to preserve the truth, to keep the light burning not as a beacon for ships, but as a memorial for the lost. He stood in silence for a long time, the flashlight flickering weakly. Then, faintly, a sound rose from above, a low hum, mechanical yet alive. The old beacon lens. Noah looked up towards the spiral staircase. Argos, he said softly. He kept it burning. The dog barked once, sharp and clear, the sound echoing through the hollow tower. Noah climbed the stairs, Argos at his side. As they reached the top, sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling across the glass dome. The lens, though cracked, caught the light and scattered it into the room. Beams of gold and blue sweeping across the walls, across the banner that read, "The Unremembered." Noah stood there, eyes wet, the medallion warm in his hand. He whispered, "We remember now." Argos barked again, his voice carrying out over the cliffs, over the sea, a sound that rose and lingered like the ghost of a signal once sent to the world. For the first time in a century, the lighthouse of Beacon Cliff was alive again. The storm had passed, but Stormvale was anything but calm. News spread faster than the tide. By morning, whispers filled the diners, the docks, the post office, everywhere. Someone had reopened Beacon Cliff. Someone had broken the silence. Marion Hale's face appeared in the window of the library as Noah pulled up his truck. He carried a box of papers, the diary, the report, the photos, the banner marked "The Unremembered." The truth that had been sealed in iron for a century now sat in his trembling hands. Inside, the old librarian closed the blinds, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you certain about this?" "Yes," Noah said. "If we bury it again, we're no better than the ones who lied." Marion hesitated. "Once this leaves here, you can't take it back. They'll come knocking. They always do." Noah nodded. Argos lay at his feet, watching her with calm, steady eyes. Marion looked at the dog, then at Noah, and sighed. "Then we'll make sure it reaches the right hands." Together, they spread the documents across the table. Weathered pages, government seals, signatures. She photographed each one carefully with an old camera, then uploaded the images to a news server. It took only minutes for the files to begin circulating. By noon, independent reporters from Portland and Seattle were calling. Within hours, it was everywhere. The lost soldiers of Beacon Cliff. U.S. Navy's century-old cover-up exposed. The town of Stormvale changed overnight. Cars began arriving, families stepping out with faded letters, black and white photos, medals that had never been claimed. Some cried quietly at the sight of the lighthouse on the horizon. Others stood in silence, fists clenched. The mayor called an emergency meeting, but by the time officials arrived, the townspeople were already gathered at the base of the cliff. Men, women, children, all staring at the rusted tower that had once been forbidden ground. Eli Moran was among them, the young store clerk who had once warned Noah to stay away. His eyes were full of something new, not fear, but guilt. He approached Noah slowly, removing his cap. "I was wrong," Eli said. "My grandfather used to tell stories about soldiers crying in the fog. I thought he was losing his mind. Guess he was just remembering." Noah handed him a pair of gloves, then helped me bring them home. For 3 days, the town worked side by side. They cleared debris, scraped rust from the iron, and replaced shattered glass panels in the lens room. Marion directed volunteers like a general, organizing meals, supplies, and even a donation jar that filled faster than anyone expected. Reporters filmed as Noah repaired the ancient mechanism, hands blackened with oil and salt. Argos never left his side. Sometimes he would bark at the sea, as if answering a voice only he could hear. On the 4th night, as the sun bled into the Pacific, the lighthouse stood ready. Fresh paint gleamed where rust once ate through the stone. The old beam mechanism had been restored with a new motor from the Coast Guard depot, donated quietly by a sympathetic officer who had read Noah's story. The entire town gathered for the relighting ceremony. Lanterns glowed along the cliffside, flickering in the wind. Reporters held cameras ready. The families of the 14 fallen men stood in a solemn line, each holding a small plaque with a name. Marion stepped forward to the microphone. Her voice shook but carried strong. "For 100 years we were told to forget. Tonight we choose to remember." She turned toward Noah. "It's your family's light. You should be the one." Noah stepped up to the switch. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. Argos stood beside him, chest out, tail still. He looked out at the faces below, the descendants of the lost, the people who had once been complicit through silence. Then he looked up at the tower, its lens waiting in the dark. They were betrayed, Noah said quietly, voice steady as the sea, but never forgotten. He reached for the lever. The room fell silent. Then a click, the lighthouse groaned to life. Gears turned, metal shivered, and the great lens began to spin. A single beam of white light burst forth, cutting through the fog, slicing across the black water like a blade of truth. It swept over the cliffs, the faces, the sea itself, chasing shadows away that had lingered for a century. People gasped, some wept openly. Marion clasped her hands to her mouth. Argos threw back his head and barked, once, then again, the sound clear and strong. It echoed off the cliffs, rolled over the water, and faded into the night. The crowd joined in applause, not the kind meant for celebration, but for release. A century of silence had broken. Eli stood nearby, wiping his eyes. "Guess she wasn't cursed after all," he murmured. Noah smiled faintly. "No, just waiting for someone to listen." Above them, the beam continued to turn, slow and steady. The repaired glass glowed like fireflies frozen in motion. Later, when the crowd dispersed and the cameras went dark, Noah stood alone at the railing. The sea was calm, silver beneath the moonlight. Argos sat at his side, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You did good, boy," Noah whispered. Argos leaned against his leg, sighing softly. For a moment, Noah imagined he could hear distant voices carried on the wind, the faint echo of laughter, of Morse code tapping through time. Behind them, the lighthouse hummed, alive once more. The light swept over the water, pausing for a heartbeat on the dark line of the horizon before turning again. For the first time in 100 years, Beacon Cliff was no longer silent, and somewhere deep inside the steady rhythm of that beam, Noah felt it. The truth had finally found its way home. A year had passed since the night the light returned to Beacon Cliff. The once-forgotten tower now stood proud against the grey sky of the Oregon coast, freshly painted and alive with visitors. What had once been a place of silence and fear was now filled with voices, laughter, and the hum of new beginnings. The sign at the entrance read, "The Beacon Memorial, dedicated to those who were never remembered." On a mild spring afternoon, the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and pine through the air. A group of school children walked up the hill towards the lighthouse, led by their teacher. They chattered and pointed at the view. The cliffs, the old keeper's house restored into a small museum, and the enormous Fresnel lens that now gleamed like a jewel in the sunlight. Noah Reeves watched them from the porch. His hair was a little grayer now, his face calmer, lines softened by something close to peace. Argos lay at his feet, his coat streaked with silver, eyes half closed but alert. The old shepherd still turned his head whenever the wind shifted, as if listening to something only he could hear. The children gathered around the bronze statue near the path, a man in a naval coat, standing beside a German shepherd. Beneath it, engraved in brass, were the names of 14 men, and one phrase, "They kept the light so others could find their way." One boy, no older than 10, pointed at the statue and turned to Noah. "Is that the dog from the story?" he asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Noah smiled. He rose slowly, resting a hand on the railing as Argos lifted his head. "That's him," Noah said softly. "But he didn't just guard a lighthouse?" The boy frowned. "Then what did he guard?" Noah crouched beside Argos, his voice steady and warm. "He didn't bark for food," he said, his hand resting gently on the old dog's neck. "He barked for the truth." The boy's eyes glowed with wonder. He knelt and patted Argos's fur. "Did he really find it?" Noah looked out towards the horizon, where the ocean shimmered under the late afternoon sun. "He found more than that," he said. "He found a way to bring the light back when the world forgot it." Behind them, the visitor's guide began a tour inside the restored tower, her voice carrying faintly through the open door. "This was once a classified naval site," she said. "For decades its history was erased, but thanks to one man and his dog, we now know the truth of what happened here." Noah walked slowly down to the cliffs with Argos trotting beside him. The path was lined with wildflowers, white and gold, swaying gently in the breeze. From the edge, he could see the beam sweeping across the sea just as it had a century ago. Steady, unwavering. He thought of Edward Reeves and the others who never came home. He thought of Marion, who still worked at the library, now a local legend herself. And of Eli, who'd gone on to study marine engineering, inspired by the story of the lighthouse that refused to die. The wind grew stronger, tugging at Noah's jacket. Argos stood beside him, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the horizon. A fishing boat crossed the line where sky met sea, the beam of the lighthouse catching its hull for a brief moment before fading into the distance. Noah took a deep breath. The air was clean, alive. "Still guarding, huh?" he murmured. Argos wagged his tail once, as if answering. Down below, near the rocks, the waves crashed against the cliff in a slow rhythm. Steady, eternal. Noah closed his eyes and listened. It wasn't the roar of the sea he heard this time. It was the quiet heartbeat of a place finally at peace. Later that evening, the last visitors left. The memorial lights flickered on, bathing the path in a soft golden glow. The lens atop the tower turned, its beam stretching across the dusk, sweeping through clouds and mist, cutting through the dark like an old promise kept. Noah sat on the porch, Argos resting beside him, head on his knee. The radio inside the museum played softly, the same frequency the lighthouse once used to send its signal. A familiar voice came through. a reporter revisiting the story of Beacon Cliff. "They called it the light that refused to die," the voice said, "because some truths don't fade. They wait for someone brave enough to listen." Noah looked down at Argos. "That's you, partner," he said quietly. "You listened first." The dog's eyes glimmered in the fading light. The beam turned again, washing over them both. The cliffs glowed for a heartbeat, then fell back into the blue of twilight. The sound of distant waves blended with the rhythmic hum of the lighthouse, creating a peace that words couldn't hold. Noah whispered one last time, more to himself than to anyone else. He didn't bark for food, he barked for the truth. And as the light swept across the sea one final time that night, the camera pulled back, revealing the lighthouse shining bright, steady against the dark. A line faded onto the screen, glowing softly over the image of Argos lying by Noah's feet. He didn't bark for food, he barked for the truth. What's your story with a loyal pet? Follow and share if you believe some lights never die. Support German Shepherd Stories for more tales of loyalty, courage, and the bond that never fades.